This is the Biblical Mind Podcast, produced by the Center for Hebraic Thought. Honest 5-star reviews help others find this podcast. Visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org for articles and videos that explore the deep structures of Scripture.
Well, I've always loved drawing. I don't remember a time before drawing, basically. I also don't remember a time before Jesus. I was lucky enough or blessed enough to come from a family that, though was not committed in probably what we would say a very faithful way to going to church, they did take me to church, and to a church that, though it was sort of a liberal denomination, where I heard about Jesus and I fell in love with the story of Scripture. And so my work was, as a child, I just drew all the time. I drew during church. I remember making comics during church. And eventually, as I grew up and realized that I wanted to have a job of drawing, whatever that meant, and I wanted to make comics, or I eventually figured out the role of illustration in the world and what that really meant. It was only a matter of time before these two sort of early loves of mine collided. I do not think of it as a very intentional process. It was more of, I just can't keep the spiritual themes out of my work, because they're so just connected with what I think about and how I was raised.
And you're currently a professor at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Is that correct?
Thank you. Yeah, it takes 45 seconds to say the name of our school and title, so I don't mind the abbreviation. Yes, I'm a professor in the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Art at Washington University in St. Louis.
So you, I assume, well, can you just describe, what do you teach? What's an average course load or class that you teach, and what's your approach to illustration?
So I'm the founding chair of a new graduate program called MFA Illustration and Visual Culture. And what we do in this course is we take young artists and we teach them not only to be studio artists and makers, but also writers, authors, and scholars. And we study visual culture, we study comics, we study visual ephemera, and what that means, what that says about our world, and how by participating in culture, understanding it, and making culture, we can ultimately shape culture. So I teach, writing. I teach comics, illustration. I teach design thinking to some degree. I have taught type in the past.
By type, do you mean like fonts?
Yes. So,
sorry, forgive the ignorance.
No. It's a common error, actually. A font is really like if you had Garamond, which is a typeface. A font would be Garamond italic, right?
Okay.
So if you want to be a nerd, you can say typefaces. So teaching typography is really teaching typographic design, using type as a tool for both messaging, communication, and form building.
I'm tempted to digress on the issue of type right now.
Oh, I think we should. There's nothing more beautiful than talking about typography.
And I draw a lot. I love type. It's all over my work. I can't separate it.
Okay, so let me ask you. That's right. Yeah, it is a lot of embedded typography. I don't know what the word would be, but yes. By the way, I cannot believe I have not found your art before this, before Ned introduced me to it, and it's fantastic. I love every bit of it. So let me give you an issue that I have faced in the past. I lived in Israel briefly, and I travel there quite a bit for work. But when I first went to Israel, I came with a seminary understanding of Biblical Hebrew. And I thought somehow that was going to help me understand Israeli Hebrew, which it does not at all. It's two different languages. But what I wasn't prepared for was this other problem, which was that I had only encountered Hebrew in one typeface. square script Aramaic, this very particular typeface. It's like if you've only ever read English in Times New Roman or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get off the plane in Israel and immediately confronted by cursive signs, in cursive Hebrew, but also just the typeface of traditional Hebrew. And it was embarrassing. I couldn't read anything. I couldn't read a menu. And it really made me for the first time in my life, getting outside of the Roman script, think about how far you can bend the letter before it becomes incomprehensible. And I wonder if I'm sure you've thought about this, but are there rules that artists play by when it comes to this in typography?
Yeah, for sure. Ned knows this very well. He's a gifted designer and expert in drawing letter forms as well. But yeah, it's all about clarity versus mystery, really. And so if you're trying to communicate something, a type is an interesting thing because it is both a symbol and an object at the same time, right? In my work, I sort of push the boundaries between when it is a symbol, when it is standing in for something that we read as a word and an idea, and then as an object in space that you have to encounter. Most people, when they see type and image together, they read the type, then look at the image. But what I enjoy in my work is if I sync the type inside of the image so that you're forced to see the image first and read the type second, or even the words and image are basically unified into this one sort of gestalt experience, which is a fancy German word for meaning that, the whole is more than the sum of the parts, right? You can break it up, but the togetherness of an idea is really what makes it powerful. So yeah, you can bend and play with it, but ultimately, if it is not communicating, if the type is not doing its job in that particular moment, then it's a failure of design.
Well, I think with your work, you're integrating these letter shapes in architectural ways and as characters in the illustrations. I think of the graphic designer. He was popular in the 90s, David Carson, and he said, "Don't confuse legibility with communication." And I think that's where you come up against it. I think that both John and I are, at the end of the day, trying to communicate, and when you push the typography to the point that it doesn't do that, you've actually shot yourself in the foot.
Right.
You've broken the form in some way, or broken the etiquette by which we're supposed to interact.
Well, you're not loving your neighbor is what I would end up saying. That ultimately, we're not trying to make art that you can't enter into. I mean, both John and I want you to enter in and get as much as you can from the work.
Yeah.
A good way to think about illustration is we are people that do not hate our audience, right? And
exactly.
That is not always the same. That's not always true of all artists. I mean, some artists do hate the viewer and intentionally thwart understanding. And that is, a choice, and that is an idea, actually. It's a concept. It's an interesting one. David Carson, the type designer, very much hated the reader, and that was his idea of communication. So again, I'm not invalidating that. I'm saying that is a choice, a design choice. And as illustrators, we long for clarity and communication.
You're cutting to the bone with this comment, because I had an editor once ask me that question. Do you hate your reader? And it took me a while to figure out what she meant. I am looking right now at this illustration from one. I'm not sure which book it's from, but it covers both pages, and it's Cain. And I think one of the things, this is the one I've looked at many of your illustrations that are on your website, but this is the one I keep coming back to. A, because I'm a Hebrew Bible person and I love this story, and B, because it's doing this thing that a lot of your illustration I've noticed is doing. And I told Ned his lino cuts do this as well, is you get kind of an initial impression, and then you go back in and you see something more, and then you go back in and you see something more, and it kind of unfolds the more you look at it. Which to me is very much how Scripture does compact storytelling. It's very terse stories, but the more you read it and go back to it, you see more. So maybe, and we'll post this on the show notes, maybe you can walk us through what you're doing, presuming that you don't hate us with this drawing. I think it's like it's visually just a compelling piece. But what was the thinking behind there's all this kind of ancient Near Easty architecture spelling out Cain's name, and then a half skeletonized, half enfleshed body imprisoned in his name. I don't know how else to say this. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah. This is a piece that was not a published work. I, for many, many years, have drawn during sermons in my sketchbook. So, and these are ones that I do not plan out particularly. It's something where I just draw and I just sort of let the story of the image I'm making react to what I'm hearing. So you'll see things like verses or things the pastor is saying during the sermon. And this was a reflection on the sort of conundrum of Abel, being killed and Cain building the city and being, ultimately blessed by God. And, it said Cain became a builder of a city, but that city sort of being built on, the ashes of his brother, the bones of his brother. So again, these are sort of visual reflections, visual metaphors. In my sketchbook work, I have much less. My goals are less defined for sure. I want there to be some visual ambiguity. I'm trying to throw symbols together to make you, question what this means, what it's about, what it could be saying. And some of it is just purely the fun of drawing. I mean, I got the idea I should spell Cain's name out in all these like little, Middle Eastern buildings. And it was just like, oh, I cannot wait to do that. So, it unfolds over the course of a sermon. Many times I'll revisit the next week. If we're in a series, I will take it home and paint it. And these are kind of, I don't want to be too high about this, but it's kind of visual worship. It's like reflection. It's meditation. It's enjoyment of art making. And, they're not always good. I mean, the benefit of doing this all the time is if I get 30 of them together and put them in a slideshow, it looks like every time I sit down, I make an amazing drawing. But
right.
You're not seeing.
I'm familiar with that process.
Yeah, you're not seeing the 10 others where I started it and it was a train wreck, and I'm not going to show you that. But that's part of having a sketchbook. You just make stuff, and sometimes you get some magic on the page.
What's fun is I don't do anything this complex or finished when I'm sketching in church, but sometimes sermons end up looking a lot better than they sounded.
That's very funny.
And vice versa.
I showed a piece to a pastor, one of my pastors a few years ago. It was about the body of Christ. And I drew this like, it's just horrific space, this body in space. It was like heavenly body. It was just like eyes and ears and arms all sort of glued together in this big fleshy mass. And he looked at it and he was like, I think this is a compliment, isn't it? I don't know. Maybe I don't know either. Yeah.
That, for the listeners, that image is also on John's website in his sketchbook section. And I was looking at that the other day. I was like, wait, what? And then it dawned on me. I'm like, I'm talking about the legibility of typography. You don't see the word body initially. It kind of sneaks up on you.
That's right. Yeah. It's a little too fleshy and visceral to be one you hang on your wall. But I did enjoy drawing it. And that's kind of the point.
I wonder also, like, I'm back on the Cain image, but how much in the process of I know this came out of a sketch, but then going back, I hope you didn't do this whole thing in church, because that would be incredible. I don't know how long, like how long is this sermon, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, it looks like you finished this. And I wonder how much returning to the text or returning to the message is going on. Like, is there kind of an exfoliation that as you do a piece of art, you actually see the text differently or notice different details? Or what's the process when you're dealing with the biblical text here?
Yeah, well, there's always it's funny with these. I don't do a pencil sketch first. I know this seems very discouraging to some people, but I draw with a pen right on the paper, and it's something I teach my students. Learn to draw with a pen. Learn to draw in your sketchbook with a pen. Because when you draw with a pencil, you're just thinking about erasing. You're just thinking about errors, and just being confident in your line work, right or wrong. And our sermons. I'm in a PCA church, so of course our sermons are over 2 hours. No, but they
like
are
3 points.
they're right. They're 30 minutes, sometimes 35. So I remember the first sermon I had of this. I got the A in place with the Abel tombstone and the skeleton sticking his head out, and I thought, oh, this. I know what this is going to be. And then over the next series, we were in Genesis. So I just kept drawing. So that's probably, 3 sermons. And then I take them home and paint them. And that's a whole nother process. I don't do that in church. I'm not lunatic.
I was trying to picture that.
Yeah. Just set up my easel and like water bucket.
Right. Yeah. Have it all right there. Well, I mean, there are churches, I deal with college. Well, you do too as well. But our college students, when they have college student directed worship, they like to have crayons and paper in the back. Like for those of you that want to worship through art.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
I haven't actually seen anybody take them up on it, but they do provide it as an option.
Well, I mean, for me, it's very pragmatic, the drawing in church. It sounds like I'm just trying to get a portfolio piece, but it's survival. I cannot watch someone talk without my brain spinning off into 100 different places. And when my hand is moving, when I am focused on a drawing, even if it's mindless, I am able to listen. I am able to focus on the speaker. And I do it in faculty meetings. I mean, I'm on Zoom and I'm staring at these boxes. I just have to draw if I'm going to be present, at which It doesn't look like I'm present. I mean, I look like I'm just in another universe, but it is a way for me to be there and be with folks.
I find the same way. When I'm in sermons, I always have my drawing book, and it's for the exact same thing. I'm like, I have to do this, or you're going to lose me completely.
On the flip side, actually, our mutual friend Mark Tucker is the one who eventually or initially talked me into quit writing out. I used to write out my sermons word for word and then practice them like 10 times. So people didn't know that I was reading the sermon, but I was actually, I was reciting it in some way, and that was a horrible practice. But he got me into outlining sermons, and then eventually now, if you open up my notebook, I have no artistic impulse, but I can't think of a sermon. I think of it in kind of a flow. And so it looks like, it looks like a rough sketch with a bunch of circles, bubbles, and arrows pointing to things. But it really is it's a flow of ideas in space and time. And that's the only way I can think about sermons now. And they're very terse as well. So I don't have, I might just have a verse reference or something like that for a note. But outside of that, it's just like, if you picked it up and read it, you would not be able to make any sense whatsoever out of what I'm doing there. But it's a visual diagram that I'm following. And so I think even on the preparation side, I have the same sensibility that I have to get it in visual time and space on a piece of paper in order for me to think it through.
Yeah.
And again, what we're all trying to do is represent in some other medium, because I do think preaching is basically performance art of a sort, typically done very poorly by most people, but including myself. And I think what we're all trying to do is find a way to represent what's in the biblical text. And I think I was telling Ned about this yesterday when we were talking. What scares me about art is that I feel like when I preach, I can kind of, there's a little bit of like, hey, this is what I'm thinking built into this. Here's how I understand it at this point in my life. But art, I look at what you've done here and I'm like, wow, he just locked it down. Like his interpretation is there, and it's not tweakable, it's unchangeable, and it's in ink,
for all eternity.
Yeah. And I wonder, this is the cojones question, is like, I don't know if you like The Office, but who do you think you are? Like,
right.
What kind of gall does it take? Because you have a book coming out on Jesus as well, to really kind of lock it down in ink and paper. What you think is going on in these texts, or what you think is worth noticing in these texts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's certainly true that a picture is worth 1,000 words for a lot of reasons. I used to work at the New York Times as an art director, and when we would commission art for the op-ed page, it was just a basic rule. We all understood what the text says on the page. We cannot say with the picture. The picture has to have a metaphor in order to be able to be palatable. Like when Nicholas Kristof was doing all of his Darfur columns, and they were illustrated. You cannot illustrate what he is talking about in that genocide. So you need the language, the visual language, to not mince words, but it has to have a metaphor to it that allows you to enter it. So in many ways, that's what I think I'm doing with my illustrated books. I don't think I'm offering a definitive worldview picture, like we are photographing something from a historical time and space, but I'm using the power of imagery and visual metaphor to illuminate or to unpack new meaning through the sort of strange power of imagery when you collide images together that maybe aren't supposed to go together or you haven't seen before. It gives you a way to see things in a new way. It was why Jesus told parables. I mean,
right.
The prodigal son in story is 1,000 times more poignant than if Jesus had just outlined the mere teaching, right? So I really think that's the power of imagery, is to reveal things that are just fundamentally not there without the images, and that is a striking thing to say about the Bible. But I think it's true. I think Tolkien and Lewis knew it was true that the imagination, the visual mythology of things was required for us to really to engage true meaning.
It's interesting, and sorry, this is a nerdy aside, but in cognitive linguistics, this field that's emerged in the last generation, I don't know if you ever read anything on studies of metaphor, but for reasons still unknown to us, metaphors have rich metaphors. Good humor is like a rubber sword; it wounds without killing, or something like that. A new metaphor that you've never heard. So a living metaphor, it strikes up as if you've never heard that one before. I'm going to imagine it struck up your visual core, and you actually are visualizing the metaphor in a way that you're not doing. Like there's no auditory version of a metaphor in that sense. And so so even the metaphors of Scripture, when they're new and striking, which Jesus had a tendency of taking old analogs and turning them into striking metaphors, he's actually firing up the visual core in his listeners, which is kind of magical if you think about it. And so I think you as an artist have this extra ability to actually then depict what is being struck up in your visual imagination in ways that the rest of us haven't had the training, discipline, or the skill to do. Is that fair?
Yeah, I have always thought of myself not really as an artist, capital A artist. I have come to identify myself more as a translator. It's something that I think connects to my work as a writer. I take, when I'm writing for children, I take complex things and translate them. I don't diminish them. I just translate them into a language that is different or more understandable. And I think the same thing is true with these picture books where I'm taking the Bible and, I mean, God knows I cannot improve on the words of Jesus. And yet my new book that's coming out in February, Go and Do Likewise. I'm sitting there trying to rewrite Jesus's parables in my own language. And what an absurd task this is. Who would ever think that this would be a good idea? So for me not to hate myself, the way I survive is I am translating these to a different audience, right? I'm not trying to improve on Christ's words. I don't want to lose their core. I just want to give them a new meaning, a new context, and that keeps me up at night. Frankly, I mean, I did not go to seminary. I'm doing my best as a faithful artist, but I'm very careful to say that these are artistic interpretations and not scholarly interpretations.
Maybe John, you and Ned could explain to me, why are you guys, and I mean you guys in the sense of the artistic guild, so afraid to be called an artist? Same thing with John Collins. He's like, I'm not an artist. I'm something else. I'm an explainer video guy, but I'm not an artist. What's the terror there? I don't understand it. I'm sure they're
Ned,
good
what do you
reading.
think? I'm curious of Ned's answer.
Well, I think that there's a weight to in our culture to the idea of artists, and how our culture has embraced the whole creative demigod kind of thing. I think of myself more as a craftsman, just because I'm a maker. I make things. The artist thing, I think just culturally, there's just a lot of baggage to that. And also because my work is looking at art a lot. So I'm always looking at other artwork and seeing how good it is. And I'm like, well, if that's an artist, then I can't be, because that person's really amazing.
That's what I thought was the root of this, is you're looking at other people's art and that imposter syndrome creeps up.
Yeah. And I'm very comfortable calling myself an artist, lowercase. I think Ned point where it's the capital A artist, the professional provocateur and intelligentsia that often comes with the world of gallery art. And that may be something that Ned and I are more familiar with because we studied art. And so we're a little aware of these kind of silos of thinking, but I
have a gallery. Like I operate in that world. It's definitely, I know I'm not a plumber, so I think that I have to use some word. So yes, I am an artist, but the lowercase a artist is much more palatable.
Is there a story behind the "I know I'm not a plumber" thing, or is that?
Well, if you come to my house, I'm not a plumber. I'm not a carpenter. I'm not
Fair enough. Is it? And I don't want to belabor the point, but is there a little bit of the provocateur artist kind of has the freedom to hate their audience, and that's not quite where you guys are at, and so that there's a blurry line there.
Well, and I think illustrators, I will claim the capital I illustrator mantle because it has a blue collar aspect to it.
Oh, right.
I love the sort of, we're men of the people. We make comics and then people read them and throw them away. Like there is a humility to the discipline of illustration that I am much more attracted to than the sort of I am an important thought leader in the world.
Right.
I shall now show you my art. Yeah.
Well, and the capital A artists will often tell you that, oh, you're just an illustrator. I'm like, yes, that is what I am. And and there is a little bit of a pecking order there.
I love you guys are spilling all the tea on the inside of the Society of Artists here. This is great. Yeah. John, we can find some of your art at John Hendrix, like Jimi Hendrix, but johnhendrix.com. Is that correct?
That's right.
And we'll put the links to your Instagram, all your socials on. And your book is coming out when? The Go and Do Likewise?
Yep, that'll be out in February. You can pre-order it now. It's from Abrams Books. They're not a Christian publisher. They're a secular publisher. They've also published all my other authored works, including the graphic novel The Faithful Spy about Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Which everyone needs to buy. It is an amazing book. And he also has a book, Miracle Man, The Story of Jesus. And both of those are just fantastic works.
Yeah, I'm looking at them right now, and you can find both of those on your website. If we're talking to young, I have a daughter who's an artist or a striving to be an artist. What's the generic advice you're going to give for maybe an artist, and because I think there's, like with musicians and screenwriters and all these other occupations, there's this kind of like, okay, I'm decent at this, but is this really my occupation? What's your standard advice to them? And then I wonder if you have any standard advice to Christians who are entering the Working Artist Guild.
Yeah, I think it's important not to connect your love of making stuff with your ability to pay the bills from those things. Like you can be an artist your whole life and not have the stress of that be your career. And that's valid. It's more than valid. It's needed. If you do want to have a career as an artist, generally you're going to have to be okay with doing lots of different kinds of things as you get your career started, and that's why I tell my students to learn typography, learn to do design, learn to be an editorial illustrator, write your own content, create your own content. Do not wait for the phone to ring. And carry a sketchbook. I mean, drawing is not just an artifact. Drawing is a process and it's an experience. Like art is all three of those things: artifact, process, experience. And so if you don't embrace that, like if you don't love the act of drawing, that's like 99.9% of your life. So if you like the finished product but hate the act of drawing, that's problematic, right?
That's good.
So you just have to make sure you're connected to it as something you really enjoy. And that is not the same thing as saying, find your bliss, this is not Oprah Winfrey telling you to, find your passion. It's truly because as Howard Thurman said, what the world needs is people who have come alive, right? And if you're making drawings and you feel truly alive, that is good for you. That is good for the world. That is not about happiness, right? That is calling. That is vocation. And so draw as much as you can and connect with enjoyment of that work. That is a good thing. That is not selfish.
And people can come study with you at Washington University, right? This MFA program?
100%. Yeah. We applications are now open. We take 12 students every year. We're in our second year now. It's a really special place. We've got the Modern Graphic History Library, which is one of the largest collections of illustration, ephemera, print works in the country, comics, pulp, all sorts of stuff we have in there. So we spend a lot of time in the archives. We make comics, we make picture books, we do a lot of writing.
That's great. Well, John, thank you very much for joining us in the Biblical Mind. And Ned, thanks for helping me talk to an artist.
It's good. It's good we had Ned here. I'm not sure this would have worked out well. I don't like talking to just normals without a handle.
Ned is our what do they call those things? He's our minder. He's the artistic minder here. So
that's right. Yeah,
it's been great, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Biblical Mind podcast, exploring the deep structures of Christian scripture. For more, visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org. Subscribe to this podcast at all the usual places so you never miss an episode.